We have actor Michael Gandolfini. Actor Kit Connor. Writer and director Alex Garland. And writer and director and subject of the movie, Mendoza. Thank you all for being here, and congratulations on setting the Guinness World Record for the loudest movie ever made. So my first couple of questions are going to be for the actors, but I would love it if you two could chime in as well. Michael, this is obviously an incredibly intense and nerve-wracking movie, but you also have what is probably one of the strangely funniest bits I've seen in a movie all year, when your character stabs himself with the morphine. But the character you play is obviously very logistical and tactical, but you have this sense of control constantly stolen from you, in a way, as the film goes on. So what I wanted to ask you, and you folks as well when it comes to directing the performances, is about this slow loss of control as the film goes on, and how you keep that journey in mind as you make a movie like this one.
That's a great question. I think Ray really put us through a boot camp and trained us, and really I got to talk to a lot of guys who were there. And so one of the really sort of important things that I think as actors we didn't really know at first was this kind of sense of I wouldn't say calmness, but just, sort of stoicism and keeping their cool, and trying, if they get off track, trying to get back on track. And this, what happened on this day, sort of, they had this shield where they felt kind of impenetrable and it kind of cracked. So, in terms of who I play, he wasn't a SEAL. He was there to support the SEALs through Anglico. He was Navy. But it was this, thing that me and him spoke about being there to support all the guys the best he can. And that was actually, he expressed one of his biggest fears of the day was maybe not doing a good enough job. So that was one of the things that I wanted to have there. But in terms of sort of, there's this ebb and flow of, okay, we kind of have a handle on this right now, and now we don't. And that sort of is, the job in some ways is like trying to always stay on track. So, yeah.
And obviously every character in this film, cracks or breaks or shatters in some way, but Kit, your character, being the newcomer, sort of begins that process really early, and it seems like it's a process that goes on in this very stretched out fashion. So a question I had for you, and as well as our directors, is about modulating that sort of really gradual demolition of the self, because you take a step back and it's not impactful enough, but you go too far with those emotional outbursts or those breakdowns, and then the movie doesn't necessarily work. So basically my question is about balancing that element of the performance with the film as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, the character obviously pretty much starts the film with a grenade going off, a foot away from him. So immediately he's dealing with concussion and shell shock, and as you say, he's the youngest and the newcomer of the group. So that was definitely something that we were kind of thinking about and trying to portray, and I think it kind of differentiates the different characters in a way in terms of who they are and their experience in the group. But that was something that Ray and I, that Ray advised me on very specifically. Even little mannerisms, like you can see early in the film, my mouth is open a lot. It's kind of gaping open and panting and dealing with the shell shock, and then you can sort of see progressively my mouth starts to close, and that was like a small detail of the character kind of locking in a way and realizing to fall back on the training. So yeah, we definitely tried to sort of portray that progression in him as a very green soldier who is kind of being forcibly turned into a slightly less green.
If there's nothing you'd like to add, I wanted to ask you folks a couple of questions too, obviously. So a lot of this film is about memory, and if I'm not mistaken, it is written based purely on the accounts of the people who were there, yourself included. So if you could first just take us back a little bit to how you decided to work on this film together, and for those of you who don't know, Ray was part of Civil War, Alex's previous film. And also, if you could run us through the writing process of gathering these memories and deciding, how to shape the story.
We'd worked together on Civil War, and while I was in post, so while I was editing Civil War, partly because I'd seen Ray working and had got to know him a bit, I contacted him and asked if he was interested in making a film that might be about 90 minutes or 100 minutes, where we would attempt to just forensically recreate an incident of combat. I had various reasons to do that. One of them is to do with the history of cinema and war films, and just I'll shut up there actually, but I had various sorts of incentives. So I asked Ray. Ray did have a story he wanted to tell, which he'd be better off explaining, and he told me the story. I said, okay, let's try that. And the writing process it began with a week, just finished the edit, Civil War, and then Ray and I flew to Los Angeles, where Ray lives. We sat down for a week, and he just downloaded every single thing he could remember about this incident. I'll just slightly skew off to say, I want to make a point of saying that this film is the product of an enormous amount of honesty. There's all sorts of uncomfortable things in this film that you could easily imagine people would want to hide or gloss over, but Ray did absolutely none of that at all. And we then extended it to interviewing as many people as we could who were there on that day. And there was a simple rule, I'm sure lots of the audience know the dogma movement and rules of cinema, where essentially they had a set of rules. This was a little bit like a dogma film, and the rule was nothing could be invented. And we worked by cross-referencing people's memories. That's why at the start of the film it says it's based on memory, because memory is I won't go too far down this, but you all know memory is a complicated thing. The passage of time, memories formed in extreme stress, trauma, concussion, several of the people suffering from concussion. What that does to memory is a complicated thing. And the film was intended to be as honest as possible. So there's a lot of cross-referencing. If we couldn't rely on a memory, it didn't make it in. And then by like a sort of complicated jigsaw, we pieced it together. That was the writing process.
Ray, would you like to add to that, or should I move on?
You can move on.
Okay. And just going off that, like you said, Alex, it's it has this stark honesty to it, and in a way, and genuinely not joking here, you don't have to answer this question. In a way, it becomes about reckoning with your memories of the day as well, because what the characters see versus maybe the way the camera sees certain things, like the Arabic-speaking characters, how they are framed and how they are treated. There seem to be these two opposing forces in a way, and I was curious about and again, this may be personal, but the process of finding that dramatic balance as well, because it is about a time and place where you were present as well. So it's not just some abstract thing.
No, it's not. I think, and this has been like a journey for me. So I think, if I were to have done this movie 10 years ago, I don't think I'd be able to use the skills, the craft, understanding lenses. He has a thorough understanding of that, which he helps tremendously on. But I think it's when I convey something, for example, like, hey, so this is where I was detached mentally. Post-IE, I was oversaturated with information. Whether that's hearing, monitoring 2 frequencies on each ear, having to administer aid, right? So at some point your brain's like, all right, you've reached your bandwidth, it's time to shut down. And so the skills or what's the word? Film craft, right? Just like you mentioned, we have to talk about how to convey that using film and art and so on and so forth. And so a lot of that was just direct, us figuring out how to convey that. And it's art, and that's how, looking at it, I say that's like the most accurate representation of how I felt, or even someone else. Interviewing everybody, even them feeling, all right, now you're afraid. And that's kind of like what courage is. It's moving forward despite fear. What does that look like without dialogue? And which you did a great job, like emoting that stuff. But you have to be selective, like you said, on how to cover that. Because you can totally miss it and not get it. So that's just through like lots of conversations of like, all right, how do we cover this? We need this emotion. I need to convey this specific emotion. How do we cover that? So, good question.
Just with regards to the Iraqi characters, because you specifically mentioned them, we interviewed a wide range of people and sort of got all sorts of perspectives. Everybody was subject to the same problems. One of the problems is if you're absolutely terrified, you may not remember much except that you were terrified. And I'm going to give an illustrative example which has no judgment in it. It's just a statement of fact. Some of the people interviewed, non-Iraqis, but soldiers, did not remember there was an Iraqi family in the house, for example. And you have to understand what these very, very young men were experiencing in what leads them then to the memories that they keep. 2 guys on a balcony, both of them remember shooting, being on the balcony, and they said someone was with me, but I couldn't tell you who it was. So you're talking to people with extreme tunnel vision. And in the case of 2 of the people, they're dead, so we couldn't interview them. But we did acquire a wide range of memories, and everything you see is sourced from something that somebody said. Not everything, okay, so I do have to caveat it. Someone scratching their head, or the precise words involved in a line of dialogue, that's different. There's a sort of different quality to that. But whether it's a video at the start of the film, or some people walking out onto the street at the end of the film, it is all sourced from some kind of first-person account. And that is in part, hopefully, what can make this film interesting to people, because the thing that often exists in a film, this is based on a true story, it's a true story, which will then include a lot of time compressions or characters that have been compressed and composite characters. This has a different relationship, it's making a different contract with the audience, I would say.
And so obviously a film like this doesn't exist outside the context of other war movies. Like you said, you had your own perspective on the history of war cinema, but when it comes to trying to turn away from familiar images, when it comes to trying to create something that is so subjective and true to life that it has to speak a different language and then bring the audience along as well, was there a challenge in trying to craft the film that way, simply because of what audiences might be used to versus what you were trying to do? And in my opinion, it was very successful, but I was curious about that part of it.
I think it's less to do with the images often and it's more to do with how long they're held or how long you have to live with them. So that would be to do with time compressions. There's some easy ones, like we've got no music in the film, so that has an effect that relates to directly what you were talking about. I think if you just imagine in a normal war film or in a normal film, if somebody starts screaming, probably within a minute or a minute and a half, you will have been relieved of the anxiety of that screaming. You've cut to a week later, or a different group of people, or they're dead, or they're better, or something like that. But that doesn't exist in this film because of the nature of it. When someone gets badly wounded, they're in a state of shock, they're very frightened, they're in a lot of pain. Everybody here, if they open themselves to the film, which I understand not everybody will, but if they do open themselves to the film, they have to really think about that person's pain and fear and understand that was a real person. And absolutely, yes, it's set in Ramadi in Iraq, but I think you could perfectly reasonably say that the dynamics you see playing out here would have existed 2,500 years ago with a group of Greek soldiers under attack and being overwhelmed, or Gaza, Ukraine, Second World War, First World War, Crimean War, you name it, any war. So there's something sort of semi-universal, where it speaks to a broader truth than the truth you see here. I know some people require context. I think, well, the context is fucking history, isn't it? And if you don't know about the Iraq War, if you require someone to tell you about the Iraq War, it may be incumbent on you to find something out about the Iraq War and how you feel about it personally. This film is just attempting to try to give an unfiltered account of a veteran's experience and also then a group of other people. That's its only intention. Then you have to decide what you make of that.
Thank you. I think we've got some time for audience questions. Do we have a mic as well? Okay. Yes, over here. We'll get the mic to you real quick, as fast as we can.
Yes, hello, my name is Malachi. I was wondering what it was like to train with the military for the role.
I mean, it was, I wouldn't say we got to train with Ray, and we trained with many of the things, and have this sort of very condensed version of training that they, go through. I just want to preface it with that. But it was unbelievable, it sort of kind of set the tone of responsibility and the pace in which the film really took place. There was, Ray is one of the most unbelievable teachers I've ever had the privilege to meet, and so it was, we learned a lot about tactics, room clearances, things like that. We learned a lot about weaponry, we learned a lot about terminology and speaking to air, speaking to, the Bradleys, tank assets, all that. And then there was just this sort of unspoken bonding that took place, and that's where I think the film, you feel a lot of love in there, and that is because of the boot camp and everything that we went through.
Yeah, I'd also just say, ordinarily on a film set, if you're in a group of actors, there's a lot of ego, there's a lot of people sitting in a makeup chair and sitting in their trailer for hours, and there's just a lot of self-interest and vanity and things like that. It's almost encouraged, and I think something that Ray and kind of he instilled it in us, and Alex as well, but kind of everyone on that film set instilled this idea of building a team and discipline and holding one another accountable, holding ourselves accountable for our own actions, but also holding each other accountable. It was, film sets are never ever ever like that, and I would like to try and bring it, bring that energy myself to whatever jobs I do in the future, but I don't think it'll ever be recreated.
Got someone right here?
Hi, good evening. For the actors, what drew you to the project? And Kate, you just spoke about discipline and camaraderie, but what, on a deeper level, would you say that either of you took away from the project that you didn't expect maybe going in? Because when you read a script, you have an idea of what the story is and how you approach it. What did you take home? If you don't mind sharing, what stuck with you? Personal level.
To answer your first question, the script in many ways kind of read, a lot of people say it read like a transcript, which it does. I also felt like it read like a short film in a way, because a lot of the time when someone's making a short film, they are aware of the parameters in which it's set. They know that they don't have time to have necessarily a kind of climax and a build-up and everything like that, so they just take a period of time and portray it as best they can. And that's why it felt like a short film in that way, because it wasn't attempting to fabricate or, turn anything into a story or a narrative structure. It was just a presentation of an event. So I thought it was incredibly ballsy from a filmmaking perspective. I thought there was so much you could do from an acting perspective. And yeah, I wasn't familiar with Ray at the time. I was very familiar with Alex and was a huge fan. But then as I grew closer to the project, I developed a real admiration and appreciation for kind of everyone involved in making the film.
And what stuck with you?
What stuck with me? That's a good question. Yeah, that's a good one. We all got tattoos, which is not so much on the deeper level, but I think it signifies this deeper level of, again, on a film set you make a lot of friends, and I've made plenty of, maybe lifelong friends on past jobs. But again, there was this kind of neglect of the self in a way on this job. It was just a unit, a group, and I had never really experienced that before in any regard. So the fact that we all got tattoos being Call on Me, a reference to the song, but also this maybe slightly cringy idea of, if you call on anyone with that tattoo and they'll answer, I believe it. I believe that if I do, then they will pick up.
Right over there. Yeah.
Thank you. The history of warfare is also the history of cinema, and they affect each other. As Mr. Garland mentioned, there is a universal human experience in warfare. In the not so distant future, when brutal warfare is carried out by non-human entities, is something lost in the human experience? Sorry, no, that's on the philosophical end there.
Some of the joint for that one. No, I mean, having friends still in the military, I mean, even at this age, I was involved in a lot of like R&D stuff and interfacing with aircraft. At some point, there's always, in my personal feeling, there's always going to be a need for a human component. Whether that's you're being injured by a drone that's self-aware, or if it's a drone being flown by a human. I think there's always going to be a human cost. And I think the decision making, and whether that's employing humans to do that or employing AI, whether that becomes self-aware, kind of Terminator 2 type thing. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a human cost, right? At the end of the day, the cost is the same. That's just my limited knowledge on AI capabilities.
I just I think that's
I knew it.
such a
I knew it.
really interesting question. Because it's like, if you have a war where you're not killing the other side, you're not hurting them, not taking their lives away, not just soldiers, but we always know that will also be civilians, right? Does that make you more likely to go to war? Like, if it's a war with no death, does that actually encourage war in a strange way? And wars without death, trade wars possibly, can cause a lot of damage, right? Can cause a lot of harm. It's a really, really fascinating question. Is killing people required to win or lose a war, or to avoid a war? Is that the thing that stops us? I don't know. It's a really interesting question. Cosmic.
We've got time for one more, right here.
I don't really know how I'm going to follow that one up. I have a sound question. Obviously, sound in movie is really important. Going back to silent films, you have the score to set the mood for the audience. This is a very sound-heavy film. I really felt the plane. It's very impactful for me, the sound of that. I don't know how you replicate that on set. I don't know from a production side, an actor side, who wants to take that, but I would be very intrigued to know.
Yeah, we had speakers set up. We have speakers, some really loud speakers that were around the house. We had our stunt players with weapons just outside the house with cues. And then we had our first AD had downloaded this app where he had someone design it, right? Yeah, and it just had like dogs barking, jets, tanks, guns, explosions. And then we would just, it was all rehearsed. We would rehearse it out and they know when to cue those explosions and when to cue the aircraft. But then ultimately that sound design actually came in post-production.
There's you, there's Ray as well, because it is the unfiltered veteran voice that makes this film different, to be honest, I think. I mean, there's a few things, but that's a big one. So, look, if you take music out of a film, then the sound design is going to be front and center. You're going to be more aware of it than you normally are, so that's an interesting thing. But there's also the expertise of understanding the difference in the sound, which Ray would talk about a lot. Incoming rounds, outgoing rounds, the sort of snap noise that a bullet makes as it flies nearby, or any number of other things. And there's something in the sound which is like dirt under the fingernails. It's part of the truth, because it's the voice of someone who really knows. War films are usually made by civilians. There are some exceptions. Platoon, Oliver Stone was in the Vietnam War. There absolutely are exceptions, but typically they're made by civilians. And this one is different, and it's the whole group of Ray's comrades that participate in that, and whoever else participated, but more than any of them, it's Ray.
Sorry, that's a teeny tiny. Was there a specific reason why the film started with the 80s aerobic workout? Like the sound wise.
It's not 80s, damn.
Okay. But like sound wise. I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
no, I get it all the time. It was actually the early 2000s. I think the video came out in 2005. But there's not a lot to do there. Things were analog, if you know what I mean. So back in the day. So videos would get passed around, and it could be funny videos of a monkey driving a car or whatever. But somebody would come by with a thumb drive, and they're like, "Hey, here's the latest video." So we'd put it in. This one came by, and it was the song. Some few of the guys do the song, but the video was obviously we're young guys with testosterone, beautiful women, and we all wanted to be the guy in there. So we would just, because there's not much to do out there, we'd make fun out of it, and we'd all be dancing and listening to it. And it kind of became a ritual. The Charles Mountain character, he would put it on every time. He'd say, "Hey, bring it in. We gotta watch the video before we leave." We put it in, we watch it, and, as you saw, we'd be dancing. So it kind of became a thing. And so because that really happened, I put it in there. And it also serves as kind of like this youth. It just shows how young we were, right? And there's not a lot of narrative or dialogue or character development. So it's just a cool snapshot way to show just who these guys were with each other, just how we were as kids.
Thank you so much, and that is all we have time for, I'm afraid, but I want to thank you all for coming out, and that's all.
Thank you.